Right then, straight into it. Four-man panel because 4 goals for PSG probably deserves it. Adam Booker, Andrew Detmer, and Ollie Kirsch. Adam, I'll start with you. There's no point in pussyfooting around this, really, is there? Let's go with the collapse. In fact, let's go when Haaland puts the ball in the back of the net to make it 2-0. I was equally expecting what happened next to play out and happen, but at the same time, it still hurts me. This football club continues to gaslight us all, doesn't it, with these 2-goal leads?
Yeah, I'm thinking back on it. I don't think I felt when that second goal went in. I don't think I felt the same dread as I did in maybe the Feyenoord game, or games in the past, maybe Brighton games like that, where once the first, like even when City were seemingly playing well in those games, I knew the collapse was coming. I don't think I necessarily felt that at 2-0 last night. I think it was more. Well, I was certainly high on the Jack Grealish introduction, which we're going to come to, which helped mask any sort of negative feelings. But no,
great
to
from
be
an
honest,
academy player,
or
an EDS player.
I don't feel the same way. I didn't feel 4-2 coming because I felt that in some ways City had turned corners or at least found solutions for some of their issues. But then at the same time, we had about 10 minutes in between full time and when we hit record in this episode, and I was walking the dogs and I was thinking, what am I going to say when Amos inevitably asks me my sort of raw emotions from the game? And I think that I don't have any feeling about being hyperbolic or over the top with my emotions because we've been saying it on this podcast since October, November, that until City bring in new signings or certain players come back from injuries, the results are going to be like this. There's going to be 2 or 3 good ones, and then there's going to be an atrocious one. And that's just the way things are now because the weaknesses are what they are and the strengths are what they are, and they're not going to change anytime soon. And tonight was the perfect encapsulation of that.
The quote you've been saying, well, most of this week, I think you've said it 2 or 3 times.
They are who we thought they are.
Exactly.
Hold on. They are who we thought they were.
Yeah, exactly. Ollie Kirsch, hello, by the way. I always feel like on episodes like this, we don't usually do the normal, the small talk, how are you, blah, blah, blah. Much more important things, and it is another Manchester City collapse in the Champions League. Andrew sat in the corner at the moment. We'll get to in a moment. But again, same question. Thoughts, feelings, did you expect it? Did you feel that same sort of sharp anger and disappointment that I did, while at the same time thinking at 2-0 up, this is entirely plausible. In fact, it's kind of predictable.
Firstly, it's not the worst thing that happened to me tonight. I did get home, grab a Freddo out of the cupboard for a bit of comfort food, only to open it and find out it was a caramel Freddo.
Well, so I wouldn't be complaining. I wouldn't be complaining.
I am complaining. The second worst thing is that I had to sit there and watch Joe Butterfield heartily drink a Recorder-Lig.
Another cider, by the way, for those that aren't aware.
A fruity cider insteat of a pint of ale or Guinness. And the third worst thing that happened was Manchester City throwing away another lead. Now, the 1-0 and 2-0, at 0-0, 1-0, 2-0, I'm thinking, anything can happen. We could see the game out. We could go on and score a third. We don't know. What's really sad and really frustrating is once that first PSG goal went in, the rest of the match was deadly predictable. When the first goes in, the second is going in. Or this is how I felt anyway. When the first went in, I knew the second was going in. When the second went in, I knew the third was going in. And when the third went in, I knew we weren't getting back into the game or equalising. That is the most, I wouldn't even say it's infuriating, just the most disappointing thing for me this season, generally, as well as tonight. How incredibly predictable these patterns are once these sequences are set in motion. They're forced down from the heavens. You just know exactly what's happening. That's what's annoying me. Back when it was Feyenoord, I was kind of laughing at it because we didn't know that we were capable of doing that, and we did. We had a sneaky feeling that something mad like that had happened, but now it's not only that we know we're capable of dropping the game, completely dropping our asses, but that we will drop our asses. Not that just that we're capable of it, that it's going to happen. So that's the sad thing for me, because all was fine and dandy until their first goal went in, and after that, I think the outcome was predetermined.
Andrew, I'll bring you in because you've obviously got plenty to say yourself, but we'll lead off this quote from Jack Grealish. And he said after the match, on City throwing away another lead, usually in these moments we're so good. It happened too many times this season when we've gone 1 goal, 2 goals up, even the 3 against Feyenoord, and we've not been able to control the game and see it out. It's weird because in every other season we've been so good in these moments managing the game. I don't know if it's a confidence thing, because we know that for most of the season, especially before Christmas time, we weren't really at the levels we know that we can be, but it's down to ourselves to try and change that moving forward, especially go and win the game next week against Club Brugge. So Andrew, it sounds like the players themselves are a little bit surprised by this, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I don't think it's a good thing or a bad thing, Amos. I think it just is what it is, because the fact is that the problems that exist in this squad are not problems really of players being out, other than with the exception of Rodri. It's really a problem of, and maybe not even a problem, but it's the cost of the successes we've had for 4 years, which is that Pep ran a tight, small squad and played the same players again and again. And so he trusts this core group of guys to play his style. And now that core group of guys are either too old, too injured, or too worn out to do what is necessary. And so when things start to fall apart, they just don't have the extra gear anymore to get up, and City don't have other players to turn to in those moments because Pep hasn't bedded in those players. That's not me criticizing Pep or saying that, oh, this is all his fault. It's just, there's trade-offs on everything in sports. And for my money, what we've experienced over the last 4 years with Pep is completely worth this cost. And it's why I frankly just can't be bothered to get that upset. But it's also why, short of probably 3 new midfielders, that 3 new defenders we've already brought in, and a couple new attackers, and a period of time, we're just not going to change. Like, this is what it's going to be, and getting upset or angry about it isn't going to change that, because it's just not going to change.
Yeah, I mean, I get Andrew where you're coming from, and I think, Adam, wholeheartedly, we'll get the emotional stuff out of the way before we actually dissect, if we can, what went wrong. But I think wholeheartedly, I do agree with the fact that this team has expired, and we knew it expired. But for me, tonight, the game on Wednesday, whenever you're listening back to this, it was egg on the face for City's board, really. And Cheeky Bergerstein, who, we were on the show the other day praising him for a fantastic January window, and that's fair enough, but we know the last 18 months have been stale. You've got João Neves running the show, and he hasn't come out of nowhere, by the way. And I appreciate there'll be people who watched that PSG game, probably the first game they watched of João Neves. He was doing that at Benfica, and he was obviously touted very highly. But alongside that seems to be this 9-figure fee, £100 million that Benfica was said to have wanted. He went to PSG for 60 million quid. You're talking a single figure difference between what City play for Matheus Nunes. And I'm not piling on Matheus Nunes. I actually thought, given the circumstance, playing against probably the most informed left winger in European football, in Bradley Barcola, he played okay. He did fine. But it's the decisions like that which, at the time when you're winning league titles, sure, you're not going to get rid of Gundogan, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that, blah, blah. But that play was there, and Jesus, how much of a difference he'd have made to City. That, to me, is where my anger sort of manifests and has been manifesting.
Yeah, and I think we also forget that, in all this talk of how the board have dealt with sort of refreshing the squad in the last 3 to 4 years, I think we also forget that City did fork out 100 million on 2 midfielders in Calvin Phillips and Matheus Nunes, and there's not only criticism to be leveled at the way that they refresh the squad in terms of numbers, but there's also a level of criticism that has to be doled out when it comes to how they refresh the squad and who they did it with. I think we've had the Calvin Phillips chat a million times. Matheus Nunes is kind of a different story because he is at least playing in a way that Calvin Phillips never did, just not in midfield. So not only have they not brought in personnel in general, but when they have, it's been poor choices. It's not the right personnel. But we've had this conversation a million times. How it all played. You're spot on though. When you watch that game back against PSG, it was the epitome of a team in PSG who was coming out of a cycle with Neymar, Mbappe, and Thiago Silva to an extent, and Lionel Messi, and all of those players, the sort of quintessential PSG era for 6, 7, 8 years, obviously minus Messi. And the way they dealt with coming out of that cycle and bringing in Luis Enrique and the young, exciting, bright players they've brought in, that was the perfect eye opener right there. Was this PSG team could have been what City could be in the last 12 months with a mix of the old guard that gave you all the success over a 4 to 5 year period and the new guard that's coming in and replacing the old guard, essentially. So, yeah, I don't know what there is to say necessarily specifically about this game, because the way that City conceded every goal was the way they've conceded every goal since October, which is a lack of athleticism, a lack of, I think, confidence to deal with a crumble. Once the crumble starts, it's a snowball. It's rolling downhill infinitely. And it's going to keep happening.
I was going to say, Adam, more than just the style, it's the fact that once one goal goes in, it's just an endless torrent of goals from the other side. And
this isn't new. Like 2017 to 2019, City had the same mentality issues. The difference was those crumbles happened on rare occasions. But you think back to games against Liverpool, a couple games against Spurs, where when 1 or 2 went in, you knew 3, 4, and 5 were coming. So, this isn't necessarily something new. It's just the scale in which and the frequency in which it's happening is new.
But for me, anyway, that they were different crumbles. They were the best team in Europe who just had a very evident mentality problem that as soon as they felt the earth moving beneath them, they just completely collapsed. Ollie, I mean, your face tells an absolute picture. For those who can't see it, you were sort of slumped, one hand over your eye. But
although I have to cut in, Ollie looks very, very, very upset. But he was telling me just before we got on here, he'd rather we didn't qualify for the next round, anyways.
But so. We're gonna have that debate, because I know there's 1 or 2 members of the panel who have a different view to me, so we'll fire that up and we'll save it for part 2. But Ollie, the goals are the goals, and it is what it is. And the issues were the issues in October, and they're going to be the issues until the summer. They may even be the issues going into next season. But in a game like that, for me, we will move to the actual football now. It was bonkers at times to see the way City's midfield was operating. And I've seen people criticising the fact that Kovacic was playing. I've seen people criticising the personnel selection. My simple answer is, what are the alternatives? Nico O'Reilly isn't going to be playing away at PSG. Rico Lewis gets bullied every time he even attempts to play that position at the moment. Jack Grealish, possibly, but he's barely played. And when he came on, he looked bright, but has he got 90 minutes in him? Absolutely not. Bernardo Silva is getting more washed than a laundrette at the moment. So look, the personnel is the same. You're not going to be able to change that. You can change the setup though. And I see why Guardiola doesn't do it in the Premier League, because you'd expect, even at City's lowest ebb, them to put together some resemblance of a decent performance. But in a cauldron like that, in a situation like that, what is essentially for PSG a knockout game, what is kind of for City the first leg of 2 knockout games, to have Kovacic, to have Phil Foden, Kevin De Bruyne, who has his limitations, struggling to move at the moment. You understand why he's in the pitch. You get a moment of brilliance. It didn't happen, whatever. But specifically Kovacic and Foden, the amount of times they're trying to dribble it out of City's own half, when you saw how electric PSG's press was, it was madness. And that comes from the manager, surely. The players are not doing this on themselves.
Firstly, Detmer, if you say again that we can't be angry, or there's no point being angry or frustrated or disappointed, or whatever 2 choice words you went for, I'm going to reach across the Atlantic and slap you into next week. The second thing,
I was speaking for about 2 minutes myself.
Yeah, I was holding on to that one. Sorry. I think what was going on with this trying to dribble out of midfield is because there's no movement ahead of them, especially in the second half when the tired legs are tired. There's nothing going on ahead of them. So, players like Phil Foden are incredibly adept with the ball at their feet. So when there aren't too many options going, then what options do they have left? And they don't want to go backwards
the ball moves
because
faster.
the defenders...
It sounds like a grassroots football, Dad, but the ball moves faster than the players do. Pass it.
That was
Pass
one
it round.
from from goal, Santiago Munez.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but not to go full bells.
I think what Ollie
remember
is saying,
the basics.
there's no one to pass it to.
Correct.
There is
no
nowhere
movement
else
ahead whatsoever. Paris were very organised at the back. Haaland was doubled up on. De Bruyne has not got the legs to get forward as quickly as possible. The only way he's getting forward is in a slow, controlled build-up. So when Foden is playing out of our third with the ball at his feet and he looks ahead of them and it's either a double-marked Haaland or some open space and potentially a PSG player in front of him, he's going to have a go. It's just, you say that we can't, sorry, you said that we can do this in the Premier League. I'm not sure we can over the next few weeks because we're going to have several cauldrons to deal with. We've got a few big games coming up. We've got a horrific run of games coming up. And these are teams that will piece us apart, as PSG did in the second half or later on in the second half today. So it's tough. The real answer, a theoretical answer, or even a football manager's answer, I mean the game, not Pep Guardiola football manager, is to switch up the system for now. To play a game of football that's lower intensity, more reliant on the break, keeps more bodies at the back, and doesn't rely on having the lion's share of the possession, which to do so in modern football, you have to have the legs. We don't have the legs. The problem is that these set of players that we have, and it's a problem because it's been a blessing, that they're all very institutionalized to the Pep Guardiola way of football, which demands high intensity to function. So when you lose that intensity, the very core of what we're trying to do on the pitch just breaks down, which is why, by the way, it's not a coincidence that these collapses tend to happen later on in the game. When the legs start getting tired, when our pace starts dropping, and when that fatigue that you're going to have and carry with a side full of 30-plus-year-olds sets in, that's when it's happening. And that's why, again, tonight against Paris, we looked okay for the first 45 to 60 minutes. We were good, we were competitive.
Can you not change the game plan mid-game? I mean, I think we are constantly making references to the treble season, but if City couldn't score 5 in 22-23 and they had a 1-goal lead, and I know you've just said there was no one to pass to, Jack Grealish was the perfect play for that. And he kind of did it today, but he was still, whether that was on his own accord or tactically, was dropping deeper. He wasn't an outlet as much as he was. They would simply get the ball and they wouldn't let the opposition touch it. That can't just be, that can't have disappeared overnight.
It happened later on when we were trying to push for an equaliser. We were barely farting in the direction of an equaliser, but Grealish did receive the ball out wide and he got up the pitch, he carried the ball up the pitch, and then when he looked up, the only person with him was Haaland. That was it. The only person there was Haaland. It did go to Haaland, and then Haaland was forced back wide. When it went back wide, I think to Grealish again, it just went backwards, and then some errant pass somewhere else, and before you know it, it's turned over again. We are. It's not an individual player problem. I don't think. Yes, Bernardo isn't at his peak. Kevin De Bruyne is not at his peak. A lot of these players are, of course, past their peak, but they are still phenomenally talented footballers. The problem is the collective. The collective is old. The collective is not covering the hard yards. If one player is doing 2 kilometers less than they were in their pomp 2 years ago, but then you spread that across 5 players, that's 10 kilometres less that City are covering on the pitch.
It don't even have to be 2K,
That's
does it?
huge.
I take your point. It can be 500 metres, and that's still, the intensity.
2.5 kilometres, across
exactly,
5 players.
Yeah.
These are the small margins for each player that when you extend that across half the team with an average age of 28, with multiple over 30, that's going to hurt. So for me, it really is mainly a numbers issue. I have full faith in Bernardo. I have full faith in Kevin De Bruyne. all of them, Stones, all of these players that have been around for a while, I don't think any of them have dropped off to the degree that Kyle Walker did, to the point where it's like, okay, you have got to bounce.
Yet.
For now, but they as a collective are too fucking old. They are too damn old. We've got to get...
Ollie, the problem is that City's best years have never been about an individual player's ability. It has been about the collective. And the problem is...
exactly.
Well, but the problem is that you have, like, when you say, I have full faith in Bernardo Silva, I have full faith in Kevin De Bruyne, I don't. This is who they are now. Like, this is who they are now. This
right, but
the
team that we're putting out there on the pitch around them, especially once we get into the 60, 70, 80th minute of a game, when their legs in particular start going, there needs to be other players around them that can pick up that slack. And that's what we're missing.
Is that you can have maybe one player at the level that most of these main players in the squad are now, and put in players around them to cover. And like that's kind of what we saw against Ipswich. Like, Kevin De Bruyne did not look anywhere near as washed as he has for weeks against Ipswich, because there were players making runs around him so that he could just sit deep, not really have to run, and make the passes that he can still make. But at the highest level, at the games that you need your stars to step up, which is a game like today, Bernardo's not good enough anymore. Kevin De Bruyne is not good enough anymore. Kovacic, clearly not good enough anymore. Like, that team as a whole, nowhere near good enough. And as much as we want to like love and have these nostalgia fests for some of these incredible players, like saying, well, they haven't fallen off as much as Walker. Yeah, but we held on to Walker too long, and we saw what happened. We need to start cutting ties.
On that point, I think they have. I think the difference is that Kyle Walker plays in a position that exposes his issues far more than Kevin De Bruyne. The Kevin De Bruyne doing a Kyle Walker is Kevin De Bruyne trying to carry the ball forward and make a pass in behind, and there's one of two outcomes. He can't carry the ball forward and he loses it, or he tries to make the pass in behind and it goes into row Z. But if it's Kyle Walker, it's a goal because it's at the other end of the pitch. I think
or it's him just not doing anything, which I didn't think Kev played necessarily badly, but
no,
but he is there to create, and if he's not creating.
He's a player that even at his peak, even at his absolute sublime peak, if he's not doing the Kevin De Bruyne things and he's not absolutely on top of his game, he's a passenger, an absolute passenger. And I'm not trying to come on here and slay Kevin De Bruyne, because I genuinely think he's the greatest player of all time to ever play for this club. Whereas, a player like Bernardo Silva in his peak, if he's not doing things that result directly in goals or assists or whatever, there's hard yards that he's running, there's winning the ball back, there's all that kind of other stuff. Whereas now with Kev, anyways, I don't need to just go on and on about how washed all these players are. We've been doing it constantly. But I think there are quite a few players who are at the Kyle Walker level. The issue is they're doing it in a different part of the pitch that doesn't result in them going to Milan.
Yeah, I wish I was going to Milan again. It was great before the Juventus game when we were in Milan. The Juventus game, not so much. And I imagine the people in Paris are thinking the same. It makes it even more bewildering that, according to reports, City weren't considering any January moves as recent as I think it was early December. At least there have been January moves. We'll see how that one pans out. That was the first part of the show. If you want more, make sure to check the City Ramble wherever you get your podcast from.